From a world record fail that changed how cubes are made, to a cheating scandal at a world championship, here are the top 5 moments that changed the sport of Rubik's Cube solving forever. Starting with Felix, who is about to break Matt Volk's world record, but finishes with one of the corners twisted. But how did this happen? Well, if you slow it down even more, you'll notice that with just one turn left, the cube looks perfectly fine. But somehow on this very last turn, the corner twists by itself. This happened because Felix was using a Rubik's Cube with rounded corners, which was normal at the time, making the cube easier to turn even when misaligned. But it also makes unintentional corner twists quite easy. So shortly afterwards, Moyu, the cube manufacturer, made a second version, which made some changes to the corner to fix the problem. And in the following years, all the cube manufacturers started making the corners look more squared as well. But unlike older cubes, which have a corner that's basically a block, you'll notice this part is hollow, meaning the cube can still handle misalignments while still preventing corner twists. And at the same competition I broke my one-handed personal best in, Felix, using a cube from his new sponsor, finally gets his world record back by 0.01 seconds, and something else. But in 2015, Felix is about to set a much crazier world record, because the record at the time for one-handed solving was 8 seconds. But still using the same cube that corner twisted him out of his other record, Felix is on pace to destroy it, and does exactly that. But something was wrong. Now, when you break a world record like when I did, you're given the scramble to recreate the solution with a delegate watching, which I thankfully did. But when Felix was given the scramble, he couldn't recreate it, and the delegate decided not to give him an extra attempt on a different scramble. And it was later found out the scrambler made just one wrong move, meaning the record should not have counted. Now, some people weren't happy that the record was still kept, and this led to some others missing out on their own world records over the years. But as Felix himself said, it did lead to improved regulations in the following years, and 4 years later, after getting an even crazier time on a misscramble of his own, which now didn't count, on a proper scramble, Max Park finally beats his record 4 years later. But what if one tiny slip of the hand costs you a World Championship title? Because at the 2017 World Championship on Songhyuk Nam's first solve, the timer resets back to 0. But this wasn't the first time this happened, as earlier at the end of Sebastian Bayer's last solve of the 4x4 finals, on pace to not only become world champion but break the world record, has the same problem. And after a bunch of staff swarms his table to check over his footage, they decide not to count the solve. But as for Songhyuk, they initially ruled it as a timer malfunction, and he was given an extra attempt, but he does a lot worse. So what happened to both of them? Well, if you look closely where they stopped the timer, you'll notice their right thumbs are placed in a similar spot. And you'll see that their thumbs happen to be around the same spot as where the reset button is, right next to the timer pads. Meaning they both accidentally hit the reset button, and because it's considered to be the fault of the competitor, both of the results didn't count, including Songhyuk's 8-second extra attempt, which instead appears as a did not finish. But while Sebastian still became world champion even with the DNF, Songhyuk would still perform well on his other 4 solves, coming in 2nd place. But if not for the reset, if he happened to get similar times for the rest of his 4 solves, people think he could have won, but obviously we'll never know. As for what was done about this, while O-rings were used in some future competitions to prevent this happening, it wasn't until 2021 when the new Gen 5 timers came, which had features to prevent such problems, like how the reset button required being held down for longer before activating. But this big what if moment definitely had some influence towards such changes. But can you spot what's wrong with this solve? In June 2024, Yi Heng decimates his own world record average for solving the 2x2 cube, with a time of 0.78 seconds. At first, people were stunned and thought he set a record so good that it was impossible to beat. Because unlike the one-handed record, which is just a single solve, it's a lot harder to get lucky with the average. But if you slow down the first solve, you'll notice he's already made one turn, but his wrists are still on the timer pad and so the time hasn't started. This is because instead of him starting the solve with his fingers down, he's sliding his arm forwards, only releasing when his wrists are on the pads, saving a crucial tenth of a second or more, but this isn't allowed. But because this technique, called sliding, happened so quickly, the judge can't tell he's doing this, and only real-time footage was allowed to be used to assess the solve, so no penalty was applied. But people weren't happy about this, so the rules changed to allow frame-by-frame analysis of videos. But this only applied to future attempts, meaning Yi Heng's impossible record would still count, which obviously caused an outrage, even leading to a change.org petition with almost 1,700 supporters. And so later on, they finally update the rule to apply to all past solves, which finally disqualified Yi Heng's controversial world record. But thankfully, he'd later get a clean 0.88 second world record average that still stands today. But what happens when one moment doesn't just change a rule, but exposes the biggest scandal in Rubik's Cube solving history? Way back in the blindfolded finals of the 2007 World Championship, Matthias gets 2 successful solves in a row. But on his last one, the judge puts a hand in front of the cube, and he suddenly seems to forget what to do next. But after pausing for a while, he seems to recall what to do, but then the judge puts his hand in front yet again. But this time, he's still able to keep turning and solve the cube for a 3rd time in a row. And while this one was a lot slower, his first 2 solves were already enough to secure him the World Championship title. But obviously some people thought he might be cheating by peeking under the blindfold. But against one of the best cubers of his time, including in non-blindfolded events, they were gonna need definitive proof. But then they found something in one of his solves in the multiple blindfolded event, because on his second solve, disaster struck. Here, he wants to do a setup, an algorithm, then undo the setup to solve 2 edges, in a way that preserves the location of basically every other piece of the cube. But while he does the setup and algorithm correctly, when he undoes the setup, he does it wrong. He accidentally swaps 2 moves around, which messes up the cube. Now in order to win his event, let alone podium, he must fix his mistake, because unlike nowadays, if you mess up even one cube, you'll always be ranked behind all the other perfect attempts, even if someone just solved 2 out of 2. And the only way to do this without looking like you're blatantly cheating is to perfectly undo the moves you messed up and then redo them correctly, taking 6 moves to fix his progress and all the corners once more. But instead, after rotating the cube around as if he's trying to figure out what he screwed up, he solves this corner then fixes these ones. But the way he does it completely messes up the position of all the other edges, instead solving all the corners about 50 moves later, and further down the line, while figuring out where the remaining pieces are, completely flips over the cube even though there's no need to. And this, combined with a bunch more evidence from past competitions, proved beyond doubts that he cheated on multiple occasions. So he was told to return his €2,000 prize money, and upon returning it would be given a 3-year ban, while all his blindfold solves ever would not count. But he never returned the prize money and vanished. But as a result, a new rule was enforced where the judge must put a cover between the competitor and the cube throughout the entirety of any blindfold solve, which is still used to this day. But as controversial and painful as some of these moments may be, they've helped reshape cubing into a fairer sport and allowed the best competitors to push the limits of what's humanly possible.